La 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 la. It's so beautiful. Wonderful to be
Oh,
here.
yes. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Inner Tapestry Series. I'm Safrianna the Queer Spirit Guide, joined by my wonderful friend, Red MoonEagle. Today we're going to be talking about the Akashic Records and librarian entities and guides.
Mm,
And we're going to see where this is going to go. This is a topic that I am going to admit I have a toe in the water of as somebody who has worked with a lot of star seeds and people doing spiritual work. So the Akashic Records is a hot topic, but it's not, I don't do any accessing of, that's not my thing at all. So I don't really know the mechanics of it. And Red is going to help us untangle some things today. So before we get started, I always like to say, these are our thoughts, perspectives, opinions, things that we have gained through our experience. The most important experience for you is your authentic experience that you have lived, breathed,
mhm.
experienced. So our perspectives are here to expand, to open, to create dialogue, not to tell you that you are wrong or bad or anything like that ever. So let's get
No,
started. Red, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself.
thank you. My name is Red MoonEagle. I am a psychic catalyst, a teacher, and a healer. And as someone who is a teacher healer, and we could say I'm a star seed as well. I don't classify myself as that, but at the same time, we could say that. It fits a lot of the definitions. One of the things that I also want to reinforce is that your lived experience is exactly what it is, and it's beautiful and it's unique and it's amazing for you. And one of the things that I learned in this meat suit experience is that sometimes your experience finds clarity and connection with some and not others. And that is valid and it's okay. There's no judgment. But going into Akashic Records and the librarian entities, it might be a little triggery for people. And I want to acknowledge that it can be. So I don't want anybody to feel like I've tossed the baby out with the bathwater in this conversation. But I do want to untangle some things. So thank
Yeah.
you.
So, my introduction to the topic of the Akashic Records initially came when I was studying the Starchetype system. So, for just a little bit of background, that was, gosh, it's like been 2.5-ish years now, I think. And it was my first introduction to the term starseed, to astral projection as a term, to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
terms, right, that I
Mm-hmm.
had just never had before. And it all made sense and it like sunk in. And the Akashic records were brought up in this system as a thing that a particular type of starseed is gifted, like it's part of their blueprint mission to help people access their records and open them to new paths or even new lifetimes. That this type of
Yep.
starseed was actually doing 5D work, helping people come into lifetimes kind of through their records and patterning. So like that to me, okay, cool. That seems like a purpose somebody would have to kind of be the cosmic historians and do their thing. But the Akasha, there seems to be a lot more to the picture. So I'd love
Uh
for
huh.
you. The Akashic records is like one little piece. There's a bigger, much bigger framework I have the sense of. So I'd love to
There is.
hear. Yeah.
There is. So we've talked about blueprints a lot in our conversations, and I like to touch back with that because this is, I think, I'm not sure. I'm throwing it out into the universe, like, hey, does this click? Because pretty consistently, guides, anytime somebody mentions Akashic records and I ask a question, they go back to where's the vibrational frequency and how much of this vast entity, this vastness of who they are, is written into the blueprint.
Hmm.
And in that blueprint, what's trying to go through the eye of that needle into the meat suit and manifest, right? And you're 100% correct. There is a 3D, 4D, 5D connection here, and with the blueprint and with who they are as an entity. So when I didn't hear the term Akashic Records till probably like I don't know, I think it was like 2011, 2012, 2013, like it fairly recently, basically, in my 5 decades of life. Like it's a fairly recent thing. And I was very confused because the person that came to me that kept talking about Akashic Records was a vibrational blue. So they were very much about learning all the things and bringing that forward,
Hmm.
processing, teaching, integrating, sharing, that compulsive sharing piece that blues do. I love it about them. I love it because it shows their passion, it shows their interconnectedness with the world. And the person that came to me, their guide kept saying to me, yeah, they're not tapping into what they think they're tapping into. They're tapping into their blueprint and they don't have a librarian. So they're only getting
Mm.
verification through their blueprint. And I went, yeah, but they keep talking about this book. I mean, I asked lots of questions. I was like, well, what are these Akashic records? I've never heard them before. And there was a couple things going on. I don't know what this person's bio number was, but there was like a lot of, how could you be a psychic and not know about the Akashic records? How could
Mm.
you not be aware that this is a thing? And I was like, well, there's a lot in the world I don't know. And I'm going to admit that first. Like, I only go with what I know. And it's not the first time that I had a guide very specifically say they don't have a librarian, so they're not tapping into what they think they are. And it was kind of before I got the full explanation of what a librarian was. I knew that I have this entity that helps me with stuff, but I didn't know, and I knew other people didn't have them. And I knew that my librarian had given me a nice little image in my head so that I could relate to them. And I knew it wasn't their true form. And I knew that they were not always with me. They were only available when I needed them. And I knew it was a separate thing. But I didn't know until I found out. And it was through a reading. It was actually through a session with a client. And it wasn't this one. It wasn't the client that like, hey, this is a thing. And I went, yeah, but your guides keep saying that's not what, because this is what the person had said. They were like, oh, I went to all these trainings. I'm tapping into the Akashic records. And I went, I get that you're tapping into something. You are, but it's not what you think it is, right? And then another while goes by, I couldn't tell you how long, and a person came in and they were like, um, actually very much like you, Safrianna. They were like, oh, I'm aware of these things and I feel like I'm going crazy and I need some explanation and I need some anchoring in this. And I think I talked for like 2.5 hours just about the librarian entity answering all their questions. And their little librarian entity had come to them in a very different form than mine had. So there was this entity present, and I was like, whoa, that's not your primary guide. That is a different kind of something, something. And I don't understand what's going on. And so the librarian entities are never in a human form. From what I've been told, they never come into the human form. They're a 9D entity, right? They're in the spiral and they are a 9D entity. So when they choose to pair up with you in your blueprint, you literally have access to a type of librarian entity that can access everything in the spiral. So it can feel very much like I've been told Akashic Records. I've been told they're like the universal book of everything,
Mm.
basically. And these entities have direct, basically, access to everything that happens in the spiral. So if you have one that you have an access to a piece of them in your blueprint, you kind of do have access to all 9D. But this is the caveat that confuses people is that they're different kinds. And we've talked about you being an indigo. And so when I say something and you're like, oh yeah, that's it. That I remember that. That makes
Hmm.
sense. Indigos by vibrational frequency have more access to who they are as an entity in their blueprint. So when an indigo goes to these classes about Akashic records and they learn to tap into their blueprint, they are tapping into more of who they are that has access to things that we just don't have access here. So Akashic records, via how we translate what that means, seems to be along the lines of where you are vibrationally in your blueprint, and or do you have an entity? Do you have this particular kind of entity that's helping you go, yep, that's a thing, or nope, that's not a thing? Does that did that
It's
answer part of your question?
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna try and keep bringing this to a level where most of us can understand because I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So
So
help me clarify it.
yeah, okay. So the Akashic Records, as many people think of them, is simply information.
Mhm.
It's information, it is history, it is quantum stuff, it's magic, it's whatever you're looking for in these records.
Yeah.
And some people have a librarian entity that is a guide. I think I do have one. I have not
Oh
really
yeah.
figured out how to talk to them yet. I just know that they show up as like the Rose from Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, I love
It's
that.
so
That's
I'm like, okay,
perfect.
you're a Rose from Beauty and the Beast. Okay, cool. We'll
Yes.
figure that out eventually.
Oh,
But yeah, we haven't figured out our relationship yet. But so some people have this, and
yes. Hmm.
when they connect to that guide can essentially pull the records in and point to information from wherever. Some people do not have a librarian entity, and when they're tuning into what they perceive as the records, it's mostly access to their own blueprint. Am I
Yep.
understanding that
Yep.
delineation?
Yep.
Okay. So most people that are professionally saying like I work with the Akashic Records to help you, whatever, they probably have a librarian that they're working with to do that
Maybe.
work because if they didn't, what I'm hearing is that it would mean that they really don't have access to that bigger picture and they're probably projecting their own record on
Yeah.
someone.
And I can't say most or many or all or one way or the other because I've met both. I've met people who have a librarian that are never going to do that profession. Like that's not what they're interested in. They don't
Yeah.
want to be out there talking about stuff. And then I've met a few that are kind of out there projecting that and they don't have a librarian. But they may be an indigo or they may be a blue or they may be, like I don't know. It seems to be the blue indigos that go in that direction. And I suspect I have no proof, but I suspect it has something to do with the frequency and kind of how that frequency manifests in the human meat suit. So it's interesting because when somebody goes into learning how to access their own blueprint, they don't have a librarian, but they train in a way that helps them access their guides more clearly, I guess might be a better word. They can get clarity on a lot of things. They really can. And I actually met somebody once. She's a brilliant teacher, a brilliant teacher. I have a lot of compassion in my heart for her. She does not have a librarian, but she does have clairaudience, kind of like I do. And so what she and I got a sneaky suspicion from something she said about when I said I was clairaudient. She's like, "Oh, that would make me so uncomfortable." That she doesn't realize that what she thinks she's doing with her Akashic record readings is she's actually getting information from other people's guides, just like I do, that are clarifying that person's blueprint. So when she's tapping into Akashic records, she's actually just gifted like I am in that way, right? But because she's freaked out by the idea of hearing them, she won't let herself go that way, which is again 100% valid. I never ever want her to think that it's not real because it is. I mean, she is able to help people and it's beautiful. But Akashic records are, I think there's a little bit of confusion because the other thing I ran into was um, somebody who is very indigo and they do have a librarian. So there's this assumptive kind of like I run into with some empaths, like, well, I'm empathic, so everybody's empathic. You have
Mm.
feelings, so clearly you're just not trying hard enough. And I'm the person that will tell you I'm not empathic. Just spend 10 minutes with me and you'll figure out I don't get it at all. and not because I'm not trying, but because there's this I don't have that equipment.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. We're dissecting like there's different equipment. Okay, so there
Mhm.
are more ways to access this information
Yeah.
aside from having a librarian. It might
Yeah.
be listening to, receiving images, messages, knowingness, etc. from guides. It could be
Yeah.
an indigo-ness. It could be a
Yep.
lot of different things.
Yep.
Now, the next part I want to get into is the Akashic records are often seen as like this one place. And in
Yep.
my understanding, there's more than one place, first of all, like place,
Uh-huh.
dimensional
Mhm.
overlaid place, right?
Yep.
Very, very objectively speaking here.
Uh-huh.
Because we have like the halls of Amenti and like these halls of learning and other libraries
Mhm.
of knowledge and record. And I remember it did not make any sense at the time because it's been a year and a half since I had my blueprint done with red now. And there are
Mhm.
parts that I still will flash back to and be like, what did that mean? And I remember when you were describing my librarian, you said this is a Lemurian librarian, not an Earth librarian.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's also an element of records
Yep.
for planets and places as well that have their own teams.
Yes. Yes and no. So there's
Don't you love my
I've got
questions?
no, I love them. I do love them because I've got two guides. I got one of your guides here that's going, oh yeah, explain this, and then I have another one going, oh no, wait a minute, we got to go backwards first. And I'm like, oh my god, what do I say next? um, okay, so I usually use this as the analogy to get started with librarians. So they're not hierarchical, but they are accessible limitation type librarians. So I'll use an analogy. I've gone into the library, which is why I call them librarians. I've gone to the library and I want to find a book. I have a topic, right? Like I want to know about brooms. I want to know everything there is to know about brooms. And if you go to the head librarian, you know that a head librarian is going to go, sure, not a problem. Go into that room. And you go into that room and they start bringing in cart after cart after cart after cart of every single book in the universe about brooms. And then she goes, have a good time. And you're sitting there going, oh, what do I do with this?
Too much.
Okay. Right. But most people, if they're trying to be more targeted, they might go to the information desk and they might ask the information desk, I would like to know about brooms in relation to my blueprint, or I would like to know information about brooms from Lemuria. Okay. And you're going to get a type of librarian will respond to that. That's the one that's in your blueprint. So you might have an information desk librarian or a head librarian. That's the whole thing. Don't ask for that, please, ever in the universe. But you might get a page type librarian. So a page librarian is going to say, sure, I'll go fetch you some brooms about Lemuria or whatever. And you go off into your little room, AKA your blueprint. And anytime you ask about brooms, your page is going to bring you the 4 books from Lemuria specifically about brooms. Okay. Now, you could have a runner librarian. A runner librarian, you're only going to see the brooms that have to do with your blueprint ever. That's it. A page a little bit more might be like a realm. You might have a secretarial librarian, which is both two things. One, they have access to anything you need in your blueprint, any random question. Like, I'd like to know about Atlantis. Okay. So that librarian is going to bring you anything and everything that has to do with Atlantis. That is in correlation with your blueprint, but also as you discover things in your life, they're a recorder. So they help record into the library anything that you find connection to in this realm about Atlantis. Okay. So I've noticed that secretarial librarians are very targeted when they're attached to people's blueprints. I don't understand it. I don't pretend to understand it, but I know there's a difference because I've been told, yeah, this is a thing. Please tell them this. And I'm like, okay, we'll figure what that out is tomorrow. But there are different kinds, and there's several other layers of librarians. There's the entity librarians. and they have this amazing ability to communicate with their person in the blueprint when you become aware that that's what you're doing. And they describe all the entities that there is. So like if you encounter somebody who's an entity from a star or Atlantis or Lemuria or Montaka or wherever, like they're the librarian that goes ding 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 ding, pay attention, here's information, here's Akashic record information. um and it might be visual, it might be auditory, it might be smells, it might be visions in the head, it could be anything.
Right.
And that's how librarians communicate. They communicate via your vibrational frequency, what your gifts are, and what you decided would be your avenue of getting the book off the shelf. Okay. So there's another librarian. Oh, this one's fun. This one is the one that has to do with the various spiral layers, so the dimensional layers. This librarian is fun. I ran across one of them not very long ago and attached to somebody's blueprint. And this one was all about like trying to, I kept finding myself saying the same thing over and over again. And this person, like halfway through the reading, goes, "You can stop saying that." And I went, "What?" And she's like, you keep saying the same thing. I'm like, "What am I saying?" I didn't even realize I was doing it. And she's like, "You keep telling me I'm not actually part of the 3D. I'm part of the 5D, but I need to get through the last little vestiges of the 4D. And I still don't know what it means, but you keep saying it over and over and over again in relation to everything you're saying." And I went, "Well, apparently it's important." And then I kind of out loud said, "I wonder if this is a different kind of librarian." And I got a duh kind of on the background. And I felt really like, oh, that's a I've known of them, but I haven't had any like really cool interactions until that read. So dimensional librarians are a thing. So there's different kinds and they do different things. And why you may choose to have one in your blueprint is always very specific to you and your path and your choice.
Yeah. You've said like there's all these different kinds of librarians, and you mentioned secretarial librarians. So I want to clarify there because there's a secretary entity type too. So is that actually a separate thing, or is that a secretary librarian?
Most of the time when I've done reads, I think, because I don't remember them all, when I get a new thing, usually my guides let me kind of remember it long enough to kind of write some notes down, because I don't really retain people's details.
Right.
Not my stuff.
Yeah. Not to be stored in here. It's to come out.
Right. I mean, I think you and I have had some conversations where you're like, "So Red, you said this," and I'm like, "Great, I'm glad I said that. What else did I say? Because I don't remember that." There are, most of the time, from what I understand, secretaries are librarians, but yes, there is a type of secretarial role within a soul group, and that's a different thing. I
So
try
a
to be
member of a soul
distinguishing.
group might be
Have the role.
acting as the information gatherer, bringer for a soul group.
Yes.
Okay.
It seems it's not really an entity, it's a role, except with librarians, they are their own kind of thing.
Yes. So that's a really interesting thing to delineate there too, because we've talked about librarians are never it seems like they're not in a humanoid form. Like they are.
They can't. They can't. I guess.
When what little I've tuned in, again, this is not my area of expertise, but like I said, my librarian, that one takes on the form of a rose. The secretary has a humanoid form, so that tells me mine is different. I think she's probably soul group related. The second you said that, I was like, oh, that actually makes sense. But there's this reality that in between meat-suited lifetimes, we can become guides for other people, for members of our soul group or not members of our soul group, just whatever we feel like doing in the in-between. But we'll never be a librarian,
No.
because that is not, they are
Mm-mm.
such a separate class of universal energy doing its thing.
So I think the best way to describe it would be the framework of what we think dimensions are. There's only 9. And I get a little bit of a giggle when people are like, the 25th layer of the 16th dimension of the thing. And I'm like, there's only 9. So where are you going with that? You know, like I always giggle a little bit because they're probably just picking up like 6th or 7th dimensional stuff. And it is much more complex than 3D. So you
It
kind of,
seems infinite as you
yeah,
when you expand into the layers. It seems infinite and
it
broad
does.
and
It
ever
does.
going. Yeah.
So if you want to put a 25th layer on it, go right ahead, enjoy the icing on the cake. But the 9th dimensional layer in the spiral is where there are certain kinds of entities that I get the sense, and I'm not sure if I have it right. Nobody's ever told me I'm wrong per se from a guide, but they all laugh at me a little bit like, hee hee, maybe, hee hee. You know, like, what am I supposed to do with that? Um, but I get the sense that these librarian entities are very much anchored in the 9th dimension. I don't know if that's their true form and they have already been through all the spiral, however many times they need to be, and they just haven't exited, or they are the framework of the 9th dimensional spiral. There is a yes in that and a no in that. Like,
Yeah, I immediately got a,
maybe,
you're there, and
kind
like an
of,
and. There's an andness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's similar to, like, but not where, when I talk about dragon, not dragons, that's a different thing, dragon, they are shards of themselves. Their true form still lives where they're from in the 9th dimension. You know, they are from the 9th dimension, but shards of them do incarnate in meat suits. So we do have 9th dimensional entities that are in meat suits, but you will never find a librarian. I have been told emphatically that that is never going to happen. And it's something to do with that, the framework of the spiral, and not whatever that is. But they will come to you. They will help. They basically tap in. I think it's something to do with how you've chosen to help them manifest in the blueprint as to how they show themselves. Like yours is a rose, mine is a totally different shape thing. I'm writing about it. I wrote about it in my book. You'll get to read
Oh, I'll
about
get
that
to
when
that
that book comes
eventually as I'm editing. I love that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much to this. Ike just said this is showing me I need to rewatch the rest of the older episodes in the series because my brain is exploding. Oh, yes. And someone said, Athena said, I've been going through a spiritual awakening this year. I remember, I'm going to say this wrong, Hayao. And I remember her working on her tarot where she holds a book and she is high up close to the Akashic level. So, yeah, what would we consider in terms of that level where the knowledge is accessed dimensionally?
Yeah.
Because again, Akashic Records, one term, halls of Amenti, halls of learning, like all of these different places we call this. What dimension does that exist on? Or is
From
it
what
all of
I
them?
understand, when you're getting information from your librarian, it can feel like you're in a different level. That's basically the way my librarians explained it to me. She's like, you're not in a level because that's a hierarchical system that doesn't actually play out in the universe. There is no higher or lower level. It's
Right.
actually more of a dimensional access. So if we think about you, this vast entity, multidimensional, quantumly connected, pure love, light entity, yay, your true form, wherever you are in the spiral, and you've written this blueprint in this intermediary place, this in between place before you have a meat suit, and then you're trying to shove all that blueprint stuff in through the eye of the needle of that meat suit that you're incarnating in. Your librarian is connected to the blueprint. So there's a shard of your librarian that you have access to. So they don't hang out with you all the time. you have your primary guides. That's what they do. Some people have 3 or 4 that hang out with them all the time. Some people only have 1 or 2. I have one. I have one that's with me 100% all the time. All the others kind of come and go as I need them. My librarian, though, on the other hand, I have to very intentionally ask. I have to be in a place of asking. Now, maybe it has to do with my training. I don't know, but I use my astral temple. I have always known I had an astral temple. It's the in between place that my entity self created before I came into the meat suit. And that's where I go. I go there, and I can ask my librarian to come to me and answer my questions. Every once in a while, I've had sometimes where I've been in a session or a reading and something's stuck. Like I'm either not understanding what some of these guides are saying, or I might not be in a good place in my own meat suit and I need a little extra help. I may go breathe into my astral temple while I'm in the meat suit interface with somebody, and I can ask my librarian, "Hey, I need some help. Can you help me answer the question, or can you help me find clarity in the knowingness, right? The clairaudient knowingness of what's coming at me." And they will hold that space for me energetically or dimensionally or with my blueprint, so that if my meat suit, usually if I'm having trouble, it's because my meat suit's depleted and I've ignored that. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And they'll hold the space in that quantum layer of in between, so that I can finish the read, I can get clarity there. And I will tell you, if I have to ask the librarian to step in on my behalf to help me with the read, I will remember nothing after that.
Right.
Nothing. It is gone. I cannot ever access it again. Even if it's new information to me, it does not stick. It's gone. I don't channel. I'm not really channeling. The librarian is holding the energetic space between the blueprint knowingness and that channel gift with the meat suit. So it's like the doorway is held open. So when we're talking about levels of access, it's not linear. It's not higher to Akashic or lower to Akashic. It more has to do with, where are you accessing a librarian, or are you accessing a librarian, and have you worked on the interface between you and your librarian? So if you've worked with your librarian a lot, I can understand from my own experience with my own librarian, especially in those circumstances when I've specifically asked, like, "Hey, can you help?" Because I don't remember anything, and it can feel out of body, sorta. I mean, I'm always connected to my body in some way, so I don't really get all of that. But I can be compassionately, somewhat frameworky, understand that that might be what it feels like. Like I'm higher or more away or in a different higher dimension. It's not really what it is, though. It's not that.
It's so hard to like we live in I want to just kind of rewind. We live in a very hierarchy based world right now.
We
Our
do.
society is entirely based on hierarchy. All modern religious structures are based on hierarchy big time.
Yep.
And here, at least speaking for me, I am always operating under the understanding and assumption that we are all God. We are all of the universe,
Yes.
doing lots of things and scrambling and coming back together. And so when we're accessing higher dimensions, we're really just
Mm-hmm.
accessing more of what we fully are.
Yes.
But in the meat suit experience, we can only access a little bit of that. And it makes
Yes.
sense why we think up and down, because in a
Yes.
three-dimensional world, that
Mhm.
is part of three-dimensional reality, is cardinal directions, right? And there's
Yeah.
perceptions that we have in our felt experience of where things
Right.
are, but it's really quantumly all here.
Yes.
And part of what I teach is that the image of the Triforce, and you have present at the top, and you have past
Mm-hmm.
and future running along the bottom, and right in the middle, that is awareness. That's
Mm-hmm.
40. That's where we're able to thread thread the awareness in the needle and travel up and down and do all
Yeah.
of that perceived stuff. So it's easy for us to view librarians or guides or anything as above us
Hmm.
or whatever hierarchical thing we want to think. But the reality is they're here to help us, and they're here
Yeah.
to help us get access to what we don't normally have access to while in the meat suited body experience. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's another thing that I think is so poignant for the dark times that we're in right now. Like I spent 50 years of my life waiting for the dark time to happen. And when it happened, I was like, "Oh, great. Now we can start doing the work." And it's still kind of been a go stop, go stop. And now it's really revving up. And
Yeah.
part of what comes with, I'm going to throw this out there and hopefully it doesn't go to every single ego listening, but because I don't want it to, I really want you to just take it in and be with where it triggers, is that we're here to do something. If you're, I've heard it before and I'm going to go with it. Like if you're star seated, if you're aware enough to know that you're here to do a thing, now is the time to do it. But that also means it's going to challenge you constantly to let go of the ego that says, I'm more enlightened, I'm a star seed, I'm here to do all this work, I'm better than everyone else. That's where the 3D interface, right? And that fourth dimension bridge that even we will want to skip. We want to skip it. We want to because it's uncomfortable and it's humbling and it's painful and it hurts. And there's so much in that emotional fourth dimensional field of light and shadow that if you skip it and you think you're going to be able to do the work, the heavy lifting, universe will kick you back into that every damn time. So it's one of those things that I am, and I talk about it a lot, and I hope and I know this is not what happens, but I want it to happen where I want people to realize that I get it because I'm constantly struggling with it myself. It's not that I figured it out and I'm now in the 5D and all of y'all can't figure out your shit. That is not what I'm talking about. I am right in the middle of it all the time, every day. Every day there are moments where I go, can I just be over there?
Can I just not be doing this?
This. But this is the thing. We as a whole, as communities of spiritual entities that answered the call, that volunteered to come here to do the heavy lifting, the 3D has shown us how toxic and linear the 3D is. It's shown us that. And we don't like it because we know that potentially we should be all able to function in the 5D. So we do it to ourselves. We constantly toxify our our experience and do a huge amount of spiritual bypassing in our own communities to avoid that fourth dimensional icky emotional light and shadow growth stuff. And we as communities find ourselves hurting each other rather than coming together as these entities that are here to help all these entities in karma come out of the 3D, be aware of the 4D, and move into the 5D. And when we talk about Akashic Records, and I'm going to come back to this, this is not a shaming session about, well, I access the hierarchical of whatever in the Akashic Records. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm demeaning that. You are accessing something clearly. Clearly, you're accessing either, you know, like this lady I talked about, like clearly she was clairaudient. She didn't have a librarian, but she was hearing everybody's guides help her help people. And that's beautiful. If she wants to call it Akashic Records, leave it the hell alone. Enjoy, have a good time. Like whatever helps. But it, we spent like an hour talking about her clairaudience, which she kept saying over and over again, I don't have that. I don't have that. I'm like, well, you do. And it's okay if you don't feel comfortable with it, but also I just want to encourage you as a helper, as a healer, to become more comfortable with that idea. You're not going crazy. And then as the conversation went on, it became clear like her grandmother was clairaudient and had not wanted to talk about it. Her
Mhm.
mother was clairaudient and didn't want to be labeled as schizophrenic, and she's clairaudient and she doesn't want to admit it because of all of that generational trauma. So I'm not saying that people that are accessing Akashic records are blowing smoke out whatever bunghole. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that as community, let's untangle the layers of it so that we can be accessing our fullness with authenticity and with support so that if somebody does have one of the high end librarians, I use the word high end and that's not what that is, but
The highest access of what knowledge bases they're focused on, right? It's all of them instead of like, I have my little special package over
yeah.
here.
And I will say that the librarian that I have as part of my team, I will not tell you what kind of librarian it is, but I will tell you that I, on a frequent basis, wish that I had chosen a different one because I don't need to know nearly as much as I thought I needed to know.
I mean, you and I have that in common with we're going to put a little extra something something in this blueprint that we really don't need and it's going to drive us bonkers later, but that's part of the shadow light human experience. We have
Yeah.
to have something to rub us a little bit, right?
I almost want, I keep hoping, and I know this is just the eternal wish of, I'm hoping it wasn't my higher self thinking I needed an extra boost just because. I'm hoping my higher self said, okay, you're not really going to need all of this until further along. I'm hoping
Yeah.
that eventually it will be useful
Yeah,
because right
eventually you'll be
now,
like, here it is. It all makes sense now. Well, that's
yes,
part of, going back to this idea of our blueprints and our records and the things that we write in.
yep,
I've talked with so many clients and I'm like, this might not make sense right now. And it totally might 6 years from now or, 6 months from now. Like sometimes we've chosen things that were really just stunned why we did until it makes sense down the road. And part of that
yeah,
is being open to accessing what's happening in here and
mm-hmm.
seeing as we're unpacking awakening and unpacking tried to jam those two words together.
Those are
um
two great words together. I love it.
unpacking that's our new
We need to
word.
write that down.
uh,
That's a new word. Unpacking. New
Unpacking our
library word.
blueprint, right? It is that it's breaking it down and waking up into higher levels of ourselves and this,
I
the
would say
records.
more of ourselves, not
More of.
higher levels, just more of ourselves.
Yeah, well, I even see it as getting more access to our higher self. So,
Yeah.
part of what I teach is self with a capital S that has become
Mm-hmm.
synonymous with our higher self. It is that
Yeah.
the multidimensional part, the part that is able to stay in the calm and the compassion, just like a guide can
Mm-hmm.
for us,
Yeah.
that for ourselves, right? And as we unpack, we usually
Mm-hmm.
find that capacity to hold that thread with our higher
Yeah.
self is more and more powerful over time.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious when people are like, I want to go hire an expert in the Akashic records to access my records and tell me stuff versus, doing some work into their own blueprint. Obviously, you do blueprint work with people. I do blueprint
Mm-hmm.
work with people in a different way. So
Yeah.
there's a time and a place for going and asking for outside help to dig into these things. What can people start to do to get curious about this like in themselves?
Yep. I love when people do self discovery stuff. I really do because there is something that I've noticed with my guides and with pretty much all the guides I've ever encountered. They also love it because when you turn to do the self work, it's as though you are starting to turn on all the little individual fairy lights through your blueprint. You're turning them on one by one. And the more you go into your own blueprint, the more you pull from that thread through the eye of the needle, the more strong. That's not correct grammar. The stronger, there we go. The stronger it gets, and the more resiliency and more universal validation that you're going to get. So I giggle to this day every time it happens. Every single time. I am a 2-year-old child with a new toy every single time it happens. Every single time something happens, validates just a little bit of something, it's like somebody has given me a brand new toy. It will never get old. When I was younger, I used to wonder, like, is the universe giving me a pat on the head? Is that ever going to feel demeaning? Is it ever going to feel like you're such a dummy? Why are you still excited about it? Is it ever going to get dull? Right? I'm in my fifth decade and I am never not ecstatic. You've even seen me do it where I'm like, oh my God, there's this thing. And I'm like, I just can barely contain my human meat suit's overawed joy. Every single time there's a reinforcement of that blueprint into the meat suit. And so when I get the question of what should I do? How do I strengthen it myself? Or I just feel like I need somebody else to validate it. Both are correct. And I use a tool called the Astral Temple. Um, I've been calling it that for 4 decades ish, somewhere right around there, somewhere between that, because it made sense that the in between place, when I learned the word astral, it was in conjunction with astral travel. And I went, oh, I know what that is. That's where you crawl up the cord and you view from above. That's the in between place. And I'd known from my own younger self that you can do that in dreams, you can do that in shamanistic journeys, you can do that in healing dream journeys. Like I had trained to do that. And so when people said, "Oh, that's the astral plane," I went, "Oh, that's a cool term." And you can totally tell like some of my learning is like the late 80s, early 90s. So just FYI, terms that are very common right now were not common in my world. And my learning definitely shows when I talk about these terms as though they're new and everybody's like, that's like a common term, Red. And I'm like, but it wasn't. And so temple to me went also into all of my theosophy journey. Like I studied Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and the multifaceted Christianities. I've read at least 4 different kinds of Bibles. That's an interesting thing. And really kind of looking for what's the commonality and why is this I am the only one that's right? Where does that come from? And in the journey, I learned to really love temple worship. And I have been to some beautiful temples in our world. I've been to, well, I won't go into all that, but I realized that if if you think of that place that you've created as an entity in the in between place, most so far I have not encountered but maybe one star seed entity, if that's what you want to call it, an entity that's answered the call that didn't have an actual one well established. Most of us have a very well established astral temple in the in between place that we created way before we even came into the meat suit. And sometimes we stumble into it and we're like, okay, this is familiar and that's a whoa, that just kind of appeared. Where am I? Where's my meat suit? Like sometimes there can be a real jar when you kind of land there because it's an in between place that you created as an in between your guides and your meat suit in that astral plane. And astral temple just made sense to me. So when I talk to people about how do you do your own work, find your astral temple. There are meditations out the gazoo in how to find your place. Some people it's a meadow. Sometimes you walk down a path. Sometimes you jump in the water and you find the undersea temple. And some people go up into the air and become a bird and find it in the sky. And some people, I go up a set of stairs. I just go up a set of stairs and I find the door. And the damn door changes its shape.
I
Sometimes it's
know. I was going
carved.
to say
Sometimes it's
mine's
blank.
changed so much over the years. It's really interesting
Yes.
to look at. But yeah, like this going within. And I just want to say something here because I'm a person who's so outside of the norms of many of my teachers.
Yep.
Of my experiences are totally different.
Yep.
And there are some groups of people myself included, that the access between the 3D and the 5D is so rapid that it
Yes.
doesn't feel any different when you're accessing it than you are in your regular
Yes.
everyday experience. So I was like waiting for the like I travel out of my body and everything feels different and it's wild and I'm there, and no, it was really just me having thoughts in my head, but knowing, there's the knowingness. Oh,
Yes.
and I don't even
Yes.
see pictures because I
Right.
have aphantasia, but I see words or I
Yeah.
get descriptions like I'm reading a book on my Kindle, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
so many different ways to access this, but it is
Yes.
this like inner place of knowing that you're
Yeah.
safe, you're held by your guides, like nothing can get you there. There's
Nope.
no
Nope.
danger. It's
Nope.
like this is me and I'm okay here.
Yeah.
And it can look, yeah, I love that you said like it can look like a meadow. It can look like I originally went downstairs. Now I just appear like I'm just
Yeah.
okay, we're here. So whatever this is for you,
Yeah.
like that's okay.
You know, I like how you clarified that, because I always talk about it in a very beginnery type way, because there is this 3D linear attachment to so much of, I'm going to use the word metaphysical, spiritual world. There is so much of this. You have to train under somebody to be a thing, or you're a higher entity, or you're a lower entity, or you're a new entity, or you're a young entity, or you're an old entity. All those things have qualifications that don't, well, first off, they're not real. So there's that. And then second off, it really triggers that ego thing, that if it triggers it good, that means you're in that 4D, like positive, negative, doing the journey thing. Be there, be uncomfortable. That's part of it. And the 5D, you and I have talked about this a lot, that 5D awareness is very much that acceptance of we're all the same, and we're all really having all this complex experience, and it's all valid. And the astral temple piece, when I talk about it, I do talk about it in a very beginnery way, like trying to find it, right?
Mhm.
But you and I have that common thing where it has changed, it's done different things. And when I go into a session with somebody, when I talk about I access my astral temple, it's because I don't ever not have access to it. And if I'm having trouble sleeping or get a little insomnia or my meat suit gets dysregulated, I will go back to the very beginning meditation that helps me reestablish a healthy connection with my astral temple, because the step by step process brings me back to the 3D, helps me walk through that 4D to be in that 5D safe place of that astral temple connection.
Mhm.
So there's so many different ways of doing it, but you don't need you don't need me, you don't need Safrianna, you don't really need to call us and make an appointment and do the thing unless you do. And there is a point, I think you and I have talked about it a couple of times, where you get to a certain point and the universe is giving you these validating moments, right? And that it is leading to that connection within community, so you can get the bigger validation picture, the blueprint. And there are
Mhm.
many different ways of reading a blueprint. There's many different gifts and how we appear in the world. I'm definitely a weirdo, and I get that. I am not everybody's flavor cup of tea. I'm completely okay with that, um, because not every client is going to be able to hear me. I mean, I'm very, very lucky, and I want to send out in the universe with a lot of grace and thanks that I had so many yellow entities for so long as part of my journey, because they're confusing to me. And I love them so much. I love them so much because they have so much compassion and so much care for that journey and how messy it is. And there is so much toxic, positive, bypassing hierarchical structures that have been imbued into the metaphysical, spiritual stuff over the years, that I just would like all of us to be in the community and access our librarians or our blueprints or our guides with authenticity, and be okay with whatever guide you have, and that it's okay. You know, just because you have a librarian where you get every single answer in the universe about brooms doesn't mean that that's a good thing.
But you chose it for a reason. So
Well,
that's where you get to dig in. Why did I
yeah,
choose this in my blueprint? What is this here for
absolutely.
me about, you know?
And I have a client that she has, if you wanted to call it a universal librarian, that poor young woman has struggled off and on her whole life with people. She does not have schizophrenia. She's not hearing voices that tell her to hurt herself or other people. She has none of the criteria of the DBS, DM. Oh my God, the fancy.
DM.
Thank you. I keep trying to say DMV, and that's Department of Vehicle something, and that's
Urban
not what
motor
I'm trying to
vehicles,
say.
yeah.
Right. But she really struggles with things because that librarian is constantly giving her way more information than
Than
she
she needs,
needs.
yeah.
And the door is wide open. She hasn't figured out what the best filter system for her is. And ironically, her librarian tries to help her, which is actually making it worse, which is hilarious because that's what our guides are supposed to do.
Right.
So, yeah, I think from the Akashic Record perspective, I like that people are talking about knowledge. I would like people to be a little bit more real about it's not hierarchical, it's not somebody's better than somebody else, it's just information. And it's 9D threaded through your blueprint, like through you, your blueprint, and into this. So you've got to let go of the ego stuff because it just tangles things up. And your guide, I'm going to go back to your librarian, and having all of that Lemurian access is so important. It doesn't make your lack of knowledge of a particular other thing and wherever in the 9 dimensions doesn't make it less in any way, at all.
Right.
Just different.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're all about here is like each of our differences is to be celebrated
Mm-hmm.
because that's like the community piece. We're not meant to do it all alone. We're not meant to have
No,
it all alone until
no,
we are back as one
right.
above this whole shebang, this whole spiral. So
Messy,
that's
messy
where
time.
I want to next episode I think for sure we're going to talk about the spiral um because this is something that came up a lot today and some people I'm sure have some questions about what do you mean it only goes up to the ninth dimension and whatnot. So I'd love to come circle back to that next
Yeah,
episode and really dive into that. But I hope that overall this is a good just sense that there is more to the picture than just the Akashic records. There's so many other places we can access information, or and methods to access information
yeah,
about our blueprint, other people's blueprints, cosmic history, all
yeah.
that stuff.
So, one of the cool things about Akashic, the framework that you've actually taught me a little bit about Akashic records because I just kind of dismiss a lot of the times because I'm like it's so tangled that I'm starting to understand that there's a lot of the layering that it is the librarians. It is either librarians or somebody's like vibrational frequency that's making it translate that way. And very much like your own, like you have so much access to Lemurian information that it might be that somebody who, what was one of the other libraries you said? I can never hold on to it.
Oh, I was just mentioning like, other planets. So an Earth library, an Atlantean
Right.
library, a Mintakan library,
Yeah.
a library on an entirely different, like not planetary dimension at all.
Yes. And I have encountered some very specific librarians that are um, like the true entity inside the meat suit might be from the 6th dimension. So their librarian attachment has a lot of information from that 6th dimension. And you and I've talked about a little bit about that very chaotic sixth dimension is quite chaotic. And so it can when they're shuffling through and they're taking on all that information into the meat suit, that dimensional chaos can really trigger that meat suit's whatever their bio number is, right? Like if they're in fear, it can be like, oh my god, I'm terrified of all the galactic wars, or
Mm.
maybe body number where it's I'm so disappointed that we're never, as humans, ever going to come out of this awful thing, because sixth dimension says, oh, it's chaos. And they might translate that into their own fears, disappointments about what's happening in this dimension. Um, I totally had a conversation with somebody yesterday. They were like, yeah, we're just going to end. The human race isn't going to be here in 400 years. And I went, who did you talk to? And it was funny because she was like, oh yeah, I'm going to tell you all about it. And I heard all this long story, and I went, who was that? Right? Like, I knew that who she was talking about was somebody I knew, because the guides kept going, you know this person, you know this person. And I do know this person. Beautiful entity, beautiful person. I haven't had any encounters with them in the last 7 years, but they live in the area. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's their sixth dimensional librarian. And the person I was talking to went, what? And I don't know what their bio number is, this other person, but clearly, like, all of the messaging is clearly through their own lens of what's happening in the world, so that awareness of the stuff got muddled. Mm-hmm. It's not that it's not real, it's just muddled, right? Like, it's a real experience, it's a real knowingness that got muddled through the meat suit.
Well, and
stuff that's all muddled.
Perspective, right? It's literally perspective. Like the whole moon is not lit up at any given time. It's only 50% of it. And like, I feel like that is the reality that we have to face as entities living in 3-dimensional bodysuits, which is that we can't access 100% of it, period. So we got to release that ego stuff of ever feeling like we can truly fully know. Right? There's always a shred of uncertainty in this 3D existence. And like our, as we've talked about throughout this program, like our bio number determines that, our gifts determine that vibrational frequency determines how that's filtered. So there's so much being filtered through. And that's why I think the most important thing is to remember that every other embodied entity is so totally different than you too. Yeah. Because they're going to have an entirely different perception of the same information.
And it's fun. I like the learning process, and I hope, and it probably doesn't come across that way all the time, mostly because I know my husband reminds me every once in a while that I can sound like a know-it-all, and I don't. I really don't. I don't know it all. I learn. I'm constantly learning from every interaction. So the whole understanding of how librarians work come from, first, my lived experience of complete overwhelm. Please don't tell me anymore. I don't want to know anything else. Please don't answer that question. I mean, and you'll see me do it even in conversations where I'll ask a question and I'll go, never mind. Nope, go away. And the people in front of me are like, what is she doing that for? And I'm like, you just don't even want to know. But also seeing other people's librarians and having them manifest in reads or explain things to other people who have different kinds of librarians. These all have taught me the difference between the perception of what an Akashic record is and how that librarian entity, if you have one, comes through. Mm-hmm. And it helped me understand why, I think, I'm going to make a wild assumption here, but my theory is that the reason I'd never heard about Akashic Records is that I do have a librarian that's like, I never got tangled in the stuff. So I can sound very dismissive to Akashic Record workers, and I don't want it to sound that way, but I know that I can be very offensive, and I apologize 100% because I don't want it to be that way. And the universe keeps bringing me more people that are aware they have librarians and they have gone to Akashic Record training, and they're like, I feel like I missed something because I have this entity. And I've actually had it validated now quite a few times to know that, okay, it is real and both are real. Both are valid. Both are real. And it's okay.
Yeah.
And we need all of the pieces. When we see a book, a random book written only about one piece, it's getting all of your knowledge from only one source. And in the bio number paradigm of all those 9 different physiological filter systems, we need all of those to make a complete picture, which is one of the beautiful things that I've enjoyed about writing with you, Safrianna, is that you have also like a 1 in your sphere and a 2 in your sphere, and I've got other numbers in my sphere, so that we make a whole of wholeness that is balanced and complete.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And the picture of everything is so much. I say this as a 9 trifecta for the record, that the picture is much bigger than we think it is. Or, oh, yeah, because when I let myself access as much as I can access, it's like, whoa. Right. So
Whoa.
we don't have to overload ourselves with all of the systems and the knowledge and everything, but we can encourage ourselves to drop in, get to know ourselves more, and start from there, right? Follow your curiosities, follow what interests you. Yeah, again, the Akashic records, I think they're a thing. They totally are a thing. They're just not the only thing. They're not the only source of knowledge, and that is worth knowing. So
Yeah.
I hope this has been helpful for you today if you caught this live or you're watching the replay. Like I already said, I think we're going to come back next time with the spiral and talk more about that. That has been something I've been really interested in lately. And otherwise, if you have follow-up questions, if there's topics you want to see us cover, please don't leave it in a YouTube comment during the live, because those poof. Send us a DM, go to my website, come join our Discord, or leave like a permanent comment so that we can come back and see it and make sure we cover what you want to know about. So,
Because I want to throw this one thing out, because we're going to talk about spirals next time. If you're an entity in your true form from anything above 3D, you will have access to your true form, true self knowledge. And that can feel like Akashic records, because you yourself have wisdom. You don't always have a librarian, but that does not devalue who you are as an entity through that blueprint into this meat suit experience.
Yeah. Great thing to remind people of. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, our friends, until next time, illuminating as always, Red. Thank you so much. And we will be back in about 2 weeks. And should be exactly 2 weeks, unless anything. We're here pretty much every other Friday. So join us and let us know if you have anything you want us to cover. Until next time, our friends.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
La 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 la.
Yeah, we're going to do an outro dance.
Leaving the space and